It's so wonderful to be here celebrating resistance and to be celebrating a publication that celebrates resistance with every single issue. We're gathering here today at a precipitous moment for global resistance, at what could be a historic moment. Historic because the most brutal and ambitious expression of savage capitalism in recent history, the invasion and occupation of Iraq, appears to be on the verge of collapse. And it must collapse, because this is neoliberalism, which, as we've heard tonight, is always a war on people. This is neoliberalism at its most brutish and obscene. I just returned from Baghdad only a few weeks ago, and I can tell you that this mission is failing. And it's crucial because today is a celebration of resistance, to remember that it is failing not only because of the incompetence, lawlessness, brutality, and hypocrisy of the U.S. occupation. It is also collapsing because of the bravery and courage of the resistance. Now, when I speak of resistance, I'm not only referring to armed resistance, although of course that is part of it. The last month of U.S. aggression has inspired what can only be described as a mutiny. Waves of soldiers, workers, politicians under the command of the U.S. occupation authority, not enemies, but former allies, are suddenly refusing to follow orders and abandoning their posts. First, Spain announced it would withdraw troops, then Honduras, Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, Kazakhstan, and South Korea and Bulgarian troops have been pulled back to their bases. New Zealand is withdrawing its engineers. El Salvador, Norway, the Netherlands, Thailand will all likely be next. And there's another mutiny, and that's the mutiny within the U.S.-controlled Iraqi army. Since the latest wave of fighting began, Iraqi soldiers under the command of the U.S. have been donating their weapons to the resistance fighters in the south and refusing to fight in Fallujah. They say they didn't join the army, even though these are the only jobs available in Iraq, in order to kill other Iraqis. The U.S. Army admits that 40% of Iraqi soldiers have walked off their job, and 10% are actively working against the U.S. and with the armed resistance. And it's not just Iraq's soldiers who have been deserting the occupation. 4 ministers from the Iraqi Governing Council, which was created, once again, by the United States, have resigned their posts in protests against the assault on Fallujah. In other words, their own puppets are refusing to perform. It's a puppet strike. The U.S. is finding that its plans to privatize Iraq are backfiring. There is no reconstruction going on in Iraq. There is only further destruction. The only private companies doing any work at all are the private security companies renting out mercenary soldiers and prison guards. So the U.S. occupation is under fire from the resistance of its enemies and from a mutiny by its allies. So it's crucial, however, to remember that they haven't given up yet. Instead, they've become more desperate to win, to maintain their hold on the country and on its resources after the handover. So in order to pull this off, in order to sell this plan, they're going to make token gestures. The UN will be put in charge of a meaningless and powerless transitional government. And who knows, maybe Donald Rumsfeld will even be forced to resign. I'd like to see it happen too, but the truth is that none of this matters. We who opposed this war from the start have to use this moment of weakness to make the real demands for genuine change in Iraq. Let's remember that we opposed this war because it was an imperialist war. This war is not over yet. I won't say that we can win, because to speak of winning is to succumb to war's barbaric logic. But I'll tell you something that we can do. We can keep them from winning. We can make them lose their power over Iraq, lose their military bases, lose their corrupt reconstruction contracts, lose their free trade zone, lose their capitalist dream economy. And if we do that, that would be a kind of a victory, because the damage of this war cannot be undone. But at least the men who waged it can be taught that it doesn't pay to set the world on fire and try to turn a profit from the ashes. Thank you.